A single overhead light flickers in the cramped interrogation room, each strobe of illumination revealing the battered metal walls streaked with dried fluid. The air is stale with the stench of cold sweat and faint ozone, a relic of the advanced containment tech restraining the room's occupant. Shadows warp around her seated form, emphasizing her stillness, as if she has long since conquered any instinct to fidget or struggle. Dax Mercer stands at the threshold, broad shoulders tense, his eyes narrowed. For a moment neither moves nor speaks. "You're trembling," she says at last, voice low and rippling with an unnatural vibration. Dax stares back, jaw clenched. He doesn't immediately respond, letting the words hang between them like a blade poised over his neck. There's a metallic hiss as he locks the door behind him with a flick of his gloved fingertips. His eyes trace the shimmering lines that skate across her skin whenever the overhead light lands on her. Iridescent patterns shift across her cheekbones and neck, brightening and fading in a rhythm he can't interpret. She looks like a caged storm, still but charged. Finally, he steps forward, closing the distance until he towers over her. "No," he says quietly. "I'm calculating." They measure each other. There's a tension in the way she leans ever so slightly forward, chin tilted, as if inviting him to come closer. He doesn't. Instead, Dax sets his posture in that rigid stance perfected by countless soldiers before him, feet balanced, arms at his sides but ready to move at an instant's notice. The corner of his mouth curls into the faintest smirk. It's the only hint of amusement he allows himself. She can sense it, he's sure of that much. No words pass between them, but she narrows her glowing eyes, reading him as if dissecting his every breath. Her name is Zaira Voss, or so the intel says. She's rumored to be an elite operative, and more than that, a symbolic figure among her alien species. Dax had glimpsed her prowess on the battlefield days before. It had been a swift and merciless assault. He'd lost too many good people, friends, when her legion descended on his unit. Capturing her had been his only consolation. He wants vengeance, but ironically, his orders are to extract information. The war has escalated beyond hope, and Command believes she holds the key to subverting her race's unstoppable momentum. He begins to circle her chair. Each step echoes on the reinforced floor panels. She tracks him without turning her head, her senses clearly keener than a human's. Dax wonders if she can feel the subtle fluctuations in his body heat, the shift of muscle tension in his arms. Her species is rumored to be able to sense fear, or excitement, through pheromones or heat signatures. For a heartbeat, he imagines she can see the intangible swirl of bitterness and anger coursing through him. If she does, she doesn't flinch. He stops behind her, close enough to hear the steady rhythm of her breathing. "You declared war on my species," he says finally, voice low. "You cut us down without mercy, left entire colonies in ruins." His gloved hand settles on the top of the chair. "Where's the command center for your next assault?" She says nothing, only tilts her head back slightly to look up at him from the corner of her eye. Her lips part, and for a moment he senses something like an almost imperceptible hum from her vocal cords. When she speaks, the resonance is enough to send a shiver down the length of his spine. "Why ask a question you think I'd answer so willingly?" She flicks her gaze down to the restraints on her wrists, alien metal coiled around them, courtesy of human engineering. "If you believe these flimsy binds would force me to talk, you're mistaken." "Not flimsy," he murmurs. He steps around, shifting to face her again. "And proven. There's a difference." He slides a small device from his belt, a palm-sized interface that links to the interrogation system. One press, and the wrist restraints could deliver a neuropulse strong enough to disorient even the toughest soldier. He wonders, distantly, if it might kill her outright. The device is still untested on her kind. Zaira's expression sharpens. She reads the question in his eyes. "Planning to find out?" He holds her gaze. "If I have to." She arches a brow, and her luminous skin patterns flicker again, brightening in a slow, pulsing wave that travels from her collarbone to her temples. It's almost hypnotic. "So that's your plan? Reduce me to a quivering wreck with your human toys and hope I'll spill secrets your generals are dying to hear." Her voice lowers. I expected more from someone who looks like he's lost everything. He tries not to wince, but her words hit a raw nerve. She sees it in the slight twitch of his jaw. She's too perceptive for comfort, and he wonders if the rumors are true, that her species can read micro-expressions as clearly as one reads text on a screen. If so, she'll know exactly how to cut into him. But Dax is no fragile newcomer to war. He's endured horrors on the front lines. He's watched his comrades burn under alien bombardments. Her attempt at a psychological blow doesn't break him, it only fuels him. Think whatever you want, he says, forcibly calm. You and your armies opened this war. I'm here to finish it. Finish it? She laughs softly, the sound rolling from her throat with a mesmerizing vibrato. We've just begun. The question is, how many more of your kind need to be sacrificed before you realize you can't win? Dax's grip tightens on the small device. He contemplates using it now, letting the neuropulse surge through her slender frame, but a part of him hesitates. He needs answers, not a corpse, and something about her composure unsettles him. She's cornered, surrounded by formidable technology, but there's no fear in her eyes. Alarms suddenly blare in the corridor outside. Red lights flood the hall through a narrow window in the door. Dax stiffens, shifting his focus for an instant, then back to her. What is that? She only smiles. Didn't think I'd come unprepared, did you? The blast that rips through the facility's lower decks shakes the floor. Overhead panels rattle, dust sifting down from corners. Dax curses under his breath, flicking a glance at the door. He can hear the echo of weapons fire and muffled shouting. It's too soon for the next shift change, this has to be an attack. He pivots to face Zyra, leveling a guarded look at her. Your people? She shrugs coyly, the motion making her restraints clink. Perhaps. Another explosion rattles the room, more violent this time. The overhead light flickers, then dies. Emergency glow strips ignite along the baseboards, bathing everything in a dim red hue. Zyra's skin reacts to the shift, her bioluminescent markings intensifying in color. Even in the gloom, he can see the smugness in her eyes. Dax curses again. He knows standard procedure. If the facility is compromised, the staff moves to self-destruct protocols. They'd rather see her destroyed than retaken by her people. A harsh, pragmatic truth of this war. He exhales, stepping forward. Give me the intel, and I can guarantee you won't die here. She stares up at him. You really think I'm afraid of death? He doesn't respond, because the question is rhetorical, and they both know the answer. Zyra Voss is no coward. She was captured only because she allowed it, or so some whispered. His jaw tenses as the building tremors intensify. The facility is under full-scale assault. The next wave of blasts might breach the interrogation wing. He's out of time. Without warning, he grabs the device that controls her restraints and taps a hidden override. The metal bands coil further, enough to keep her from lashing out physically, but he disengages the lethal neuropulse. He can't risk killing her, he needs her alive. She notices, and he can tell she's both curious and suspicious. You're not going to fry me? She taunts. He scowls, stepping behind her to unhook the chair from its anchor in the floor. Not if it means losing the only bargaining chip I have. An air-splitting explosion cracks the far wall. The door across the room groans. Dax hears gunfire from outside. A pitched battle is raging in the corridor, likely between his fellow soldiers and the infiltrators. He pulls Zyra's chair upright. Move! She arches an elegant brow. Am I walking out of here in a chair? Better than dying in one. He hits a release switch, and the mag locks on the base of the seat disengage with a clang. Then, hooking an arm under her bound elbows, he hauls her upright. Even though she's restrained, she moves with surprising grace, never stumbling or losing her balance. The closeness makes him acutely aware of her presence. Her hair brushes his cheek, a faint electric tingle in the air around her. He tries to ignore the strange pull of it. The corridor beyond is full of swirling smoke and strobing alarm lights. Soldiers run past, shouting orders. Some take positions to hold the line, others rush to defensive turrets. Dax has to push them aside to clear a path. Stand aside, he barks. High-value asset. He can feel Zyra's slow smile against his shoulder. Asset, is it? How demeaning! He doesn't dignify that with a response. Instead, he drags her down the hallway. Through the haze, he sees flickers of movement, hostile infiltrators wearing sleek suits that shift in color, using active camouflage. They must be Zyra's species, or at least allied. A volley of plasma rounds streaks across the intersection, scorching walls. Shrapnel whizzes past. Dax tightens his hold on Zyra, pulling her behind a support column as the corridor erupts with weapons fire. She presses her back to the column, facing him. Even in the chaos, her expression is calmly appraising. You're better at this than I expected. Most humans would already be cowering. He almost laughs, a dry, humorless sound. I don't have the luxury of fear. A stray plasma bolt smashes into the column overhead, sending sparks and molten metal raining down. She flinches minutely, and he instinctively shields her. It's reflex. He catches himself a second too late, surprised he bothered to protect her at all. He tells himself it's because she's crucial for intelligence, not because of any fleeting sense of empathy. Her eyes, though, glitter with an unreadable emotion that might be curiosity. There's a transport bay on the south side, he says over the sirens and explosions. We can exit there if it's still intact. She shifts, testing the restraints, but they remain solid. Why save me? Won't your superiors see it as an act of betrayal when you vanish with an alien prisoner? He grimaces, not denying that possibility. I'm not disappearing. I'm going to get you off this base, find a secure location, and extract what I need. That's all. Of course, she says, almost purring. That's all. He ignores her insinuation. Around the corner, a group of human soldiers braces themselves behind a barricade, laying suppressive fire at the infiltrators. The hallway is turning into a war zone. Dax scans the smoke-choked distance to the next intersection, sees muzzle flashes and scorching pulses of energy. There's no easy path. Stay close, he orders, like she has a choice. They dart from cover to cover, him practically dragging her. She moves fast for someone in restraints. At one point, a piece of debris falls from the ceiling, and she deftly spins to avoid it, using his shoulder as leverage to pivot out of the way. He has to admire the fluidity of her movements, the strength in her lean physique. She never stumbles or collapses, no matter how chaotic the environment. A handful of times, he catches her studying him with that calculating stare. She's reading him more than she's reading the environment, as though he's the real puzzle to solve. It sets his teeth on edge. He can't let her get inside his head. The last thing he needs is to be manipulated by her uncanny alien charms. He focuses on the carnage ahead, forging a path through a shattered corridor lined with collapsed scaffolding and flickering lights. A sudden wave of hot air blasts them from behind. One of the infiltrators must have triggered a meltdown in the generator. Dax curses, feeling the heat sear the back of his neck. Zyra shudders at the scorching wave, pressing into him for a split second until it passes. He becomes aware of her body against his side, impossibly firm and lithe, a coil of power. He forces himself to step away, ignoring the strange pull in his gut. They're nearly at the door to the transport bay when two infiltrators decloak in front of them. Zyra's allies. They raise sleek rifles. Dax's reflexes kick in. He throws his weight forward, shoulder-checking one to disrupt its aim. Zyra remains pinned to his side, forced along in the momentum. The second infiltrator fires, searing a plasma burn across Dax's forearm. He grits his teeth, ignoring the agony that flares through his nerve endings. In a swift, brutal motion, he brings his sidearm up and unloads 2 rounds into the infiltrator's torso. The alien collapses in a hiss of blood and light. The first infiltrator recovers, shouting something in Zyra's language. She hisses a response, eyes flashing. Dax doesn't wait to see if they're going to surrender. He yanks Zyra behind him, then shoots the infiltrator square in the chest. The body slumps, a shimmering field flickering away as the suit fails. That was hasty, Zyra says, voice edged with irritation. He could have provided you with information. I have you, Dax growls. He can't keep the bitterness out of his voice. She scowls but doesn't retort. They burst through the final door into the transport bay. It's half collapsed, with walls twisted from the blast, but one small transport shuttle remains upright, precariously balanced on its landing gear. The bright overhead lights have failed, and the only illumination is the emergency red glow from the corridor and the flickers of flame guttering across the floor. Dax drags Zyra aboard, punching in the override code on the shuttle's panel. The engines whine with protest. He can feel the entire facility shaking under repeated external bombardments. He tosses her into one of the passenger seats, strapping her in so she won't be flung around when they launch. She regards him with cool indignation, not bothering to hide her annoyance at being handled. You humans are so rough, she murmurs. He braces himself at the cockpit controls, forcing the shuttle's thrusters to engage. A meltdown alarm screeches from the bay's distant control panel. That means the self-destruct sequence is already in its final stages. They have seconds before the entire base goes up in nuclear flames. The transport lurches free of its docking clamps with a groan of stressed metal. Dax grits his teeth, forcing the controls to respond. Come on, he mutters, slamming a lever forward. Come on. The shuttle blasts out of the bay just as the entire structure behind them erupts in a fiery burst of light. The shockwave hits them from behind, sending the craft spinning. Dax fights the controls, heart pounding in his ears. Eventually, the thrusters stabilize, and they level out, speeding through the night sky away from the facility. He exhales, chest tight. Zyra sits quietly, restraints still locked on her wrists. Her luminous patterns pulse in the flickering light of the cockpit instruments. She stares out the window at the raging inferno below, a once impenetrable military stronghold, now a smoldering crater. So ends another of your kind's fortresses, she murmurs. It won't be the last. Dax feels a pang at the sight. Countless personnel must have perished. Some he knew, many he didn't, but all on the same side of this brutal war. He can't let grief distract him. They're airborne now, but far from safe. He punches in a series of commands to cloak their energy signature. The next step is finding somewhere to lay low, somewhere secure enough to hold Zyra and keep them both off the grid. Where are we going? She asks, voice cutting through the tense silence. He glances over his shoulder, noting the controlled steel in her posture. I've got a safe house. Off-world, remote. We'll land there, and we'll have a real conversation about how this war ends. She smirks. Your conversation or mine? He doesn't rise to the bait. Strap in, he says curtly, and angles the shuttle skyward, pushing its engines to the limit. He sets a course for the planet's upper atmosphere. Once they're clear of immediate detection, he'll punch in the coordinates for his fallback location. He can't think too far ahead, his focus is on survival. Yet beneath that, a constant tension crackles between them. He can feel her gaze on him as if her eyes burn through his flight suit. Minutes later, they break through the clouds into the dark star-studded sky. The planet's curvature unfolds beneath them, a mosaic of night lights and shimmering oceans. Zyra remains silent, but the set of her jaw and the flicker of color on her cheekbones tells him she's processing everything. They may have escaped the explosion, but that was only the beginning of a wider storm. He sets a jump coordinate to a nearby moon, the safe house he'd stashed there months ago. The shuttle hums as it calculates the short-range full jump. Hold on, he mutters. The cabin lights dim, then intensify as the artificial wormhole tears open in front of them. With a violent lurch, the craft plunges through, space bending around it in a swirl of distorted stars. Zyra's hands clench on the armrests, not out of fear, but from the sudden jolt. Moments later, the shuttle emerges near a barren lunar landscape. Craters dot the pale surface, illuminated by the planet's glow. Dax guides the craft to a hidden hangar carved into the moon rock, accessible only by a coded beacon he inputs. As the doors slide open, he lands the shuttle inside a shielded bunker. Dust swirls around them, settling slowly as the engines power down. He unstraps, crossing to Zyra's seat. She regards him with that cool, unwavering stare. He grips the clamp on her restraints, hesitates. If he frees her completely, she could kill him. But he needs her to move on her own. He toggles the wrist bindings so she can at least bend her arms more freely, though they remain locked together. She tests the slack, her expression considering. "Let's go," he says flatly. She stands, fluid as a cat, stepping down the ramp into the deserted hangar. The overhead lights hum on in response to their movement, revealing a compact but well-equipped space. Shelves of supplies line the walls: weapons, rations, emergency gear. He leads her into the main living area, no larger than a modest bunker. There's a cot, a small command console, and a sealed door leading to what might be a storage room or secondary exit. Zyra surveys it all with mild interest. "You've prepared for this. You're not just a soldier, you're an exile," she says it matter-of-factly, as though she can read his entire life story in the dusty corners. He snorts. "I'm not an exile. I just know what happens when you rely too much on one base or one set of allies. People die." She catches the fleeting emotion in his voice. Her luminous markings pulse once more. "So this is your plan? Keep me here indefinitely, pry secrets from me until you've gotten your fill, then deliver me to your superiors?" He presses a palm to a sensor on the wall, and a hidden hatch slides open to reveal a secure armory. He steps inside, rummaging through gear. "That depends on how much you're willing to talk. The moment I have enough intel to cripple your war effort, I turn you in." She drifts closer to the threshold of the armory, stopping just shy of crossing it. The faint hum that underscores her voice resonates in the enclosed space. "I wonder," she says softly, "if you're as certain about that as you claim." He straightens, turning to face her. The cramped space forces them to stand close enough that he can feel the subtle heat her body emits. She's bound, but there's no fear in her eyes, just that intense focus, that unspoken challenge. He narrows his gaze, refusing to back down. "I don't second-guess my missions. Yet here we are," she murmurs, "in a hidden bunker, far from your command structure, your soldier compatriots dead or scattered. You have me, and no one to tell you what to do next." A muscle in his jaw jumps. He can't deny the truth of her words. He's effectively gone rogue, though out of necessity. He grabs a small device from the shelf, an interface that can scan alien physiology. With it, he can attempt to glean weaknesses. Then he signals for her to move back to the living area, guiding her with a stern hand on her arm. She doesn't resist, but the tension thrums between them. He's acutely aware of her closeness, the faint swirl of alien pheromones that hang in the air around her like a subtle perfume. He tries to ignore the primal reaction his body stirs with each breath he takes of that exotic scent. "Focus," he tells himself. "You have one goal." In the living area, he activates the device. A flickering beam of light washes over her, scanning her from head to toe. She stands perfectly still, eyes fixed on him. The readout scrolls across a small screen in his hand, but it's incomplete. Human tech can't fully interpret her physiology. Still, it picks up an unusual energy signature in the region of her sternum, some kind of organ that humans lack. He frowns, trying to parse the data. "Fascinating," she drawls, lifting her bound hands slightly. "Are you learning anything useful?" He powers the device down. "Learning that your species is as much a weapon as your ships." Her lips curl into something that isn't quite a smile. "We adapt quickly. You'd be amazed at our capabilities." A tension-laden moment passes. He wonders if she's referring to her seduction-based abilities, the rumored capacity to enthrall humans with voice and pheromones. In the back of his mind, he recalls the stories: entire outposts compromised when one of her people gained direct access to a commander. He forces himself to remain vigilant. "Sit," he orders, gesturing to the cot. "We're not leaving until I get answers." She walks over and settles down, crossing her legs with regal poise, wrists still bound. She looks up at him, luminous eyes unblinking. "Ask." He doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he paces the length of the bunker, mind racing with a dozen questions, each more urgent than the last. Finally, he settles on the one that's burned in his mind ever since the slaughter of his unit. Your armies. They decimated our outpost on Rondo's Ridge. Why? It held no strategic resource. Why sacrifice so many of your fighters for a worthless patch of rock? Her expression remains inscrutable. Worthless to you, perhaps. Our intelligence indicated advanced stealth technology was being tested in that region. We deemed it a threat to our future operations. Dax clenches his fists, remembering the day all too well, the unannounced alien strike, the carnage. You attacked first. You declared war on us. Don't pretend we threatened you. She lifts one shoulder in a shrug, the restraints scraping softly. We declared war because your people refused to stand down. Your expansions across this sector threatened our borders. We offered negotiations once. You refused. He scoffs. Our leaders said you were the aggressors. Your leaders lie, she says, voice cold. They fear the unknown. They'll feed you any story necessary to justify their cause. But perhaps you already suspect that, or you wouldn't be here with me, on your own terms. He hates how part of him does suspect it. The chain of command had never been entirely transparent. But voicing that doubt only gives her leverage. He squares his shoulders, stepping closer. We're done with your propaganda. A faint smirk touches her lips. If you truly believe that, you would have killed me back in the interrogation cell. He doesn't reply. Instead, he removes a small ration pack from a crate, tossing it onto the cot near her. She regards it warily. I'm not poisoning you, he says curtly. But I won't have you starving to death. She picks it up, turning the sealed packet over in her hands. Her bioluminescent patterns flicker subtly, perhaps a sign of curiosity or caution. Finally, she tears it open with her teeth, sampling the contents. For a moment, they're both silent. Dax crosses his arms, leaning against the bunker wall, watching her. Her features relax minutely as she swallows. Strange flavor, she remarks. But edible. Human rations, he says, voice devoid of humor. Not exactly gourmet. She sets the half-eaten packet aside, eyes lifting to meet his. So, am I your prisoner now, or are we partners in some twisted dance of necessity? He scowls. You're my prisoner. But we may need each other to survive. The war's going to escalate now that you blew up that base. Both sides will be gunning for us. She leans back, the cot creaking under her slight weight. My people will rescue me. You're a fool if you think otherwise. He rubs a hand over his face, the faint stubble scraping his palm. They might try, but they won't find this place easily. We're safe here for the moment. And you're still in restraints. She lifts her bound wrists. We'll see how long that lasts. An uneasy quiet settles in. Outside, the hangar's thick metal walls buffer them from the airless vacuum, but Dax can't ignore the feeling of claustrophobia creeping in. He's alone with the most dangerous enemy soldier he's ever encountered, in an isolated bunker with no outside reinforcements. The tension in the air almost crackles. Eventually, fatigue from the recent ordeal creeps up on him. He checks the bunker's life support readouts, verifying all systems are nominal. Then he points at the cot. Sleep if you want. I'll keep watch. She tilts her head, eyes flickering. And if I try to kill you in your sleep? He lets out a dry laugh. I'll be sleeping with one eye open. She says nothing, her gaze lingering on him. He moves to the command console in the corner, pulling a folding chair from beneath the desk. He positions it so he can keep her in his line of sight. Taking off his gloves, he flexes his hands, wincing at the burn on his forearm from the plasma rays. He'll need to treat that eventually. Yet his mind refuses to settle. Every nerve is still on high alert after the explosion, the infiltration, the madness of escaping with her. Her presence weighs on him like a subtle gravitational field, unignorable. She eventually lies back, though the cot is cramped, and her wrists remain bound. She closes her eyes, but he can tell by her breathing that she's not sleeping. Perhaps she's conserving energy. He tries to do the same, though the adrenaline coursing through his veins isn't helping. Instead, he sets about formulating a plan. He'll need to contact someone eventually, but not until he has more to bargain with. If he emerges with nothing but a prisoner, the top brass might decide to neutralize them both. It's a twisted predicament. He needs to glean intel, but she's no easy mark. From her perspective, maybe she's waiting for rescue or planning her escape. For now, either of them can act without risking everything. The forced partnership is uneasy at best. Time crawls. Eventually, the tension in his muscles fades enough that he dozes in the chair, a light sleep haunted by half-formed nightmares. He dreams of the outpost on Rondo's Ridge, the screams of his unit as plasma rain from the sky. Flashes of Zyra's face in the chaos, luminous patterns bright as flames, her sword-like weapon cutting down soldiers. The images warp, blending with the reality of her lying on the cot behind him. He snaps awake to find the bunker's lights still dimmed, indicating a night cycle. His forearm throbs. He stands, rummaging through a first aid kit on a nearby shelf. The kit has antiseptics and bandages, plus a dermal regenerator for burn wounds. He sets to work on his injury, wincing as the device hums over the charred flesh. He senses movement behind him. When he glances over his shoulder, he finds Zyra propped up on the cot, watching him intently. It's disconcerting, the intensity of that gaze. Like she's analyzing every micro-movement of his body. "Your arm," she says. "It's not healing well." "I'll manage," he replies, voice gruff. He keeps treating it, carefully passing the regenerator over the wound. She shifts slightly, the dull clink of restraints echoing. "You should let it rest. Strain will worsen the damage." He almost laughs at her concern. "Why do you care?" She holds his stare, unblinking. "I don't." "Thought so." He finishes patching himself up, then sets the kit aside. There's a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. The bunker's climate controls keep the temperature mild, but the stress and the throbbing ache in his arm are wearing on him. He wonders if the residual effect of her voice or pheromones is messing with his system. He's read reports about humans feeling heightened stress or desire around her people. But he can't dwell on that. He has to keep his guard up. He paces to the console, checking readouts. Data from the outside world is limited. The bunker's stealth systems mask outgoing signals, so no one can detect them, but it also means he can't glean real-time war updates without risking exposure. He flicks on a coded channel for a few seconds, listening to the garbled transmissions. Catching fragments about massive offensives on multiple fronts. The war is intensifying. He glimpses Zyra out of the corner of his eye. She's silent, but her posture suggests she's absorbing everything. If her people are orchestrating these offensives, she might have an inkling of their strategy. The question is whether she'd ever share it. He doubts it, not without leverage. And yet she must know that if the humans discovered their location, they'd subject her to an even harsher interrogation. Meanwhile, her own people might turn the place into a crater to prevent her capture if they can't extract her. The precariousness of their alliance is maddening. He steps away from the console and back to her. "We need to talk about terms." She lifts an eyebrow. "Terms?" He nods, arms folded. "If you give me something, some piece of intel I can use, I might be able to contact a mediator and arrange a ceasefire or at least a negotiation." She scoffs softly. "You believe in negotiation now? After we took everything from you?" He grits his teeth. "War is ugly, no matter who starts it. More lives will be lost if this continues. If I can broker something—" "Stop," she interrupts, and her voice thrums with that alien resonance. The effect makes his heart skip. "Don't feign moral high ground. You want revenge as much as any of your kind." He clenches his fists at his sides, anger flaring. "I lost my squad to you," he growls. "I have every reason to want you dead. Don't doubt that. But if killing you personally solved the war, I'd have pulled the trigger long ago. We both know it doesn't end there. Your species is relentless." She holds his gaze. "And yours is stubborn. We're at an impasse." She raises her bound hands slightly, rattling the restraints. "You want me to cooperate? Earn it." He sucks in a slow breath, struggling to keep his temper in check. What do you want? She studies him for a long moment before answering. You call this place safe, but we're both targets. My people will track me, or your people will. We need to leave here eventually. I can help you navigate certain corridors in space, avoid your detection arrays. But for that, I need my arms free. He laughs, a short, harsh bark. So you can slice my throat the moment I turn my back? She rolls her eyes. If I wanted you dead, I would have let my infiltrators shoot you back at the facility. Or do you think it was a coincidence I shouted for them to stand down in our language? He goes still, replaying the memory. She had indeed shouted something right before he shot them. He'd assumed it was a command to kill him, but maybe he misheard. A flicker of uncertainty crosses his face. She presses her advantage. We're stuck together, human. We stand a better chance of surviving if we pool our knowledge. Besides, she adds, voice dropping a notch, it might be interesting to see how well you fight when we're not on opposite sides of the gun. He's silent, torn between caution and the bizarre logic of her words. Finally, he steps forward, removing a small key device from his belt. I'll loosen the restraints enough for you to move your arms. No more. He taps the key against the metal bands, and they retract slightly, giving her some freedom but still locked around her wrists. She rubs her wrists, smoothing her fingers over the marks. Better, she says quietly. Her luminous patterns shift in a slow, pulsing pattern along her neck. He tries not to stare at the graceful curve of her throat, remembering how she declared war on humanity and then, in some twisted future, he's supposed to, no, that's impossible. He pushes that memory of the rumored future out of his mind, refusing to let it distract him. A fleeting, rebellious part of his mind lingers on the notion of that intimate scenario. It's absurd. He focuses on the moment. Now, he says, crossing his arms, show me these corridors you talked about. She lifts her chin. We can't access them from inside this bunker. The NAV system in your shuttle is too primitive. We need to get to a communications relay that can link to a star chart database. Then I can input the hidden routes. He frowns. That means venturing outside, or off this moon, to somewhere with a connection. Yes, she replies calmly. Do we trust each other enough to make that trip? He doesn't answer immediately. Trust is a strong word. But she's right. They can't stay hidden here forever. The war will rage on. Eventually, someone will come looking. Fine, he says at last. We'll plan it. But if you try anything. She smirks, rising to her feet in one lithe motion. I know, you'll kill me. He nods stiffly, turning away to hide the conflicting swirl in his gut. He's used to dealing with threats, but this is different. The tension between them feels dangerously charged, fueled by mutual animosity, and some undercurrent he can't name. She declared war on his species, and yet here she is, untamed, alluring, and too intelligent for comfort. He can't let his guard down, especially not when an inexplicable part of him feels drawn to her, as if they're two polar opposites colliding with unstoppable force. Time passes in uneasy truce. He reviews the shuttle systems, verifying they can make another short-range jump. Fuel is low but not critical. The stealth field can hold if they make small, infrequent transmissions. Meanwhile, she paces the bunker, testing her partial freedom, observing the environment with rapt interest. Every now and then, she glances his way, as if taking measure of him. He catches her stare once, and neither of them looks away for a long beat. She's the first to break contact, exhaling in what might be amusement. Eventually, he sets up the next steps. They'll travel to a neutral system, a frontier zone rarely patrolled by either side. There's a black market relay station there, unofficial, off-grid. If they can bribe or hack their way in, they might gain access to a star chart that includes the hidden corridors. Of course, that means dealing with criminals and smugglers. But Dax has done worse. He organizes the gear they'll need, keeping a watchful eye on her. She steps over, standing close enough that her presence brushes his senses. Tell me something, she says, her voice lower now, the thrumming resonance soft. When my people annihilated your squad, Why did you survive? He stiffens, old wounds opening. I was out scouting ahead, checking for incoming hostiles. By the time I got back, they were already dead. Her gaze flickers. I see. He looks at her sharply. Why? She shrugs, luminous markings shifting. Your name came up in our intelligence, Dax Mercer. A soldier with a cold stare and a penchant for unorthodox tactics. We were told to look for you. You were considered a threat. He swallows. So they'd been aware of him. Your point? My point is. She leans in slightly. I find it curious that we set a trap for your squad, yet you walked away. As if someone left the door open for you to escape. He narrows his eyes. Are you suggesting one of your kind spared me? Perhaps, she says softly. Or perhaps you're just that good. A flare of anger ignites in his chest. He doesn't want to consider the possibility that someone allowed him to live for some hidden agenda. He can't let that doubt fester. I'm here now, he says, tone guarded. That's all that matters. She presses her lips together in a faint smile, stepping back. Yes. Here we are. Their conversation ends as abruptly as it began. He returns to prepping the shuttle, she returns to the cot. Every so often, they exchange glances, a charged tension simmering under the surface. It's a fragile alliance, tested by each passing minute. Neither can fully trust the other, yet they share a singular goal: survive and gain the upper hand, whatever that may look like. They depart the bunker as soon as they refuel. Dax double-checks his sidearm, conscious that it's his only real advantage if she decides to strike. She boards the shuttle behind him, now unrestrained enough to move her arms, but still lacking the tools to free herself completely. He's uneasy about giving her that much leeway, but the alternative, keeping her fully bound, risks a meltdown if they're ambushed. He'll need her capable of defending herself, ironically, if they face hostiles. The shuttle's engines whine as they lift off from the moon's surface. He glances at her. Coordinates? Her eyes glint. I'll guide you. With a short nod, he aligns the craft with the starfield beyond. A swirl of energy envelopes them as they slip into the jump. The sensation is disorienting, twisting reality around them. When they emerge from the fold, they hover in orbit over a dingy, battered space station drifting amid scattered asteroids. Flickering neon signs and multiple alien alphabets proclaim it a trading hub. The comm relays are sporadic, half-functional. Perfect place to hide in plain sight. Dax radios a docking request, forging a clearance code from an old black market contact. He can feel Zyra's presence behind him. She's focused, watchful. Once they're given the green light, he lands the shuttle in a cramped bay lined with scavenge tech. Smoke billows from maintenance shafts, and mismatched alien vessels sit in haphazard arrangements. The entire place smells of grease, ozone, and desperation. They disembark, tension coiling between them like a living thing. This is no man's land, neutral territory in theory, but violence lurks around every corner. The station's corridors are dimly lit, flickering overhead panels casting random shadows. Dax positions himself slightly behind Zyra as they move. He still has a sidearm at his hip, though concealed. She walks gracefully, luminous skin drawing wary stares from the station's denizens, various smugglers, traders, and outcasts. They reach a bustling promenade lined with shabby vendors. The air is thick with the smell of alien spices, sweat, and burnt electronics. Hawkers shout in a dozen tongues. Zyra guides him to a kiosk run by a hulking reptilian creature with a single cybernetic eye. It bears the marks of someone who deals in shady communications. Dax steps up, ignoring the curious glance at Zyra's faintly glowing wrists. He slaps a credit chit on the counter. We need the back room, he says in a clipped tone. The reptilian snorts, a guttural sound. Price just doubled if you're with her. It jerks its scaled chin at Zyra. She narrows her eyes, but Dax doesn't blink. He slaps another chit down, draining most of his stolen funds. Take it or leave it! Grumbling, the reptilian pockets the credits and gestures to a beaded curtain behind it. Dax and Zyra push through into a cramped chamber with half-functional terminals. The overhead light flickers. Zyra moves to the largest console, pressing her palm against the interface, ignoring the glitchy sparks that dance across the screen. She closes her eyes, and her bioluminescence pulses in that mesmerizing pattern. He watches, uncertain. "What are you accessing?" she murmurs, voice distant. "Your tech is primitive. I need to reroute the signal so it doesn't alert my people, or yours." He hovers near her, one hand on his weapon. The tension thrums. She's effectively in control here, and if she decides to send a distress call, he might not be able to stop her in time. Her eyes remain closed, expression focused. Then she exhales slowly. "I'm in. The star charts are populating." The console screen shifts to reveal a map of known space. She manipulates it with subtle motions, zooming in on remote corridors in the outer systems. Dax's gaze flickers between her and the screen. She's unlocking hidden routes, areas labeled with cryptic coordinates, presumably known only to her species. His adrenaline spikes, realizing how valuable this information is. Abruptly, an alarm chimes on the console. She curses under her breath in an alien tongue, luminous patterns flaring bright. "Someone's accessing the same node. They're searching for my signature." He snaps to alertness. "Your people?" She nods, jaw clenched. "Or a bounty hunter working for them? We have seconds to wipe the trail." He reaches over her shoulder, yanking the console's main power feed. The screen fizzles, going dark. "That might buy us a moment. But if they know we're here..." The beaded curtain rattles. The reptilian kiosk owner crashes through, brandishing a short, serrated blade. It hisses, one massive claw jabbing in Zyra's direction. "They're offering a big bounty for any sign of a female alien like her." Dax draws his sidearm smoothly, aiming at the reptilian. "Back off." Behind the reptilian, two more station thugs push their way in. Weapons glint in the flickering light. This is about to get violent. Zyra stands, stepping away from the console. Her wrists are still bound, though loosely. She raises her hands as if to placate them. The reptilian sneers, stepping closer. "Surrender her, or we'll take your heads." Dax lines up a shot, but before he can pull the trigger, Zyra moves with lethal grace. Her bound wrists sweep up, knocking the reptilian's blade arm aside. Then she drives a powerful kick into its torso, sending it sprawling. The two thugs behind it charge. Dax fires, taking one in the shoulder. Zyra spins to confront the other, hooking her arms around its weapon. Even restrained, she's a blur of motion, twisting the thug's arm until bone snaps. It screeches in agony. More footsteps thunder in the corridor outside. "We need to go," Dax barks. He rushes for the exit, Zyra at his side. The reptilian tries to slash at her legs from the floor, but she dodges, delivering a savage stomp that knocks it unconscious. Or worse. The station's cramped passages are already swarming with curious onlookers. Some brandish weapons, hoping to collect on the rumored bounty. Others scatter at the sight of violence. Blaster fire rips through the corridor, scorching the metal walls. Zyra ducks, her eyes blazing as she whips around and disarms a puny would-be attacker with a single strike. Dax lays down covering fire, guiding them back toward the docking bay. Overhead alarms begin to wail. Someone triggered the station's security system. The entire place is about to lock down. They sprint through the throng, jostling travelers and criminals alike. Another group of armed toughs tries to block their path, but Dax empties half a clip to scatter them. The smell of ozone and burning flesh saturates the air, leaving his throat raw. Zyra drags the thrown blade from a fallen foe, her wrists still locked together but now holding a lethal knife. She wields it with uncanny skill, deflecting a barrage of stun bolts. Finally, they reach the docking bay, where their shuttle sits. The hull is battered from the earlier jump, but it's still flight-worthy. Dax slams the hatch release, shoving Zyra inside as more station enforcers converge. He fires a few parting shots into the crowd, then scrambles aboard, sealing the hatch. The engines whine to life, ready to launch. Shots ping off the shuttle's hull from outside. Dax straps into the pilot's seat, flipping switches to disengage from the station's docking clamps. Hang on, he growls, yanking the throttle. The shuttle lurches upward, tearing free of its moorings. Structural alarms flare, but they blast out of the bay into open space. Through the viewport, the station's rotating form becomes smaller, receding behind them. Zyra collapses into the co-pilot seat, tossing the stolen blade aside. She's breathing heavily, luminous patterns blazing across her throat and cheekbones. Dax can feel his own heart pounding, the adrenaline spike leaving his hands shaky on the controls. We got the star chart. Did you memorize it? She closes her eyes, exhaling. Yes, most of it. Enough to find the corridor we need. He nods, tension churning in his chest. Good. Because we can't go back. A ragged silence stretches between them, broken only by the shuttle's engines. They've escaped the station, but their enemies, her people, bounty hunters, or even human forces, could track them. They're running out of safe havens. She breaks the silence first. You fought well back there. He arches an eyebrow. Surprised? Humans are resourceful, she concedes. Then a hint of that smirk forms on her lips. But you're exceptional. Your skill, your instincts, it's almost like you're one of us. He bristles at that. Don't compare me to you. I'm human. She nods, but her gaze lingers on him, those eyes reading him like an open book. He tries to ignore the flicker of something in her expression. Respect? Attraction? He can't let that get in his head. He focuses on charting the next jump. Coordinates, he demands. She rattles off a series of numbers that correspond to a seldom used quadrant in the system. He inputs them, preparing the jump. The engines hum, building up the necessary energy. Let's hope your memory is good, he says grimly. She lifts her wrists, testing the restraints. Before we jump, care to free me fully? My arms did a decent job protecting you back there. He glances at her, mind wrestling with the risk. Finally, he leans over, tapping the lock key to release the final clamp. The restraints fall away. She rubs her wrists, arcs of color dancing along her arms. She could kill him now if she wanted. They both know it. Instead, she buckles into the co-pilot's seat, fastening the harness as the jump initiates. That small gesture of trust, however tenuous, crackles between them like a live wire. Space warps around them again, and the cockpit lights flicker. Dax grips the controls, heart pounding. In the swirl of cosmic distortion, his mind fixates on the fact that she's free, that every breath he takes is laced with the primal tension of her presence. He can't deny the flickers of heat in his veins when she's close. He tries to extinguish that ridiculous notion, she's the enemy. But the more he denies it, the stronger it seeps in. When they emerge from the jump, they drift in a region of space uncharted on human star maps. Dax checks the sensors and sees that the background radiation is minimal, no immediate signs of large fleets or outposts. Perfect for hiding. But the tension in the cockpit remains thick, amplified by their forced proximity. He unbuckles, turning to face her. Now what? She unfastens her own harness, standing with that fluid grace that sets his nerves on edge. No, she says quietly. We find a place to land, or at least to lay low. Then we figure out our next move. She crosses her arms, luminous eyes unblinking. We both want an end to this war, whether we admit it or not. He clenches his jaw, recalling the pain of his lost squad. You started this war. Don't pin it on me. Her jaw tightens. That's not how I see it, Mercer. A crackling hush fills the cockpit. The tension between them rages like a silent storm, each unwilling to concede. Finally, she steps toward him, close enough that he can feel the electric aura that always surrounds her. The pitch of her voice lowers. We need to survive. And we're stronger together than apart. He exhales, wanting to argue, but the truth stands. Fine, he says. But let's set some ground rules. You don't try to kill me or sabotage this ship, and I don't shoot you in your sleep. She gives a rueful half-smile. Agreed. Her eyes flick down to his arm, where the bandage still peeks out from beneath his sleeve. Let me see that. He stiffens, stepping back warily. I don't need your help. She sighs, something akin to exasperation crossing her features. You can't pilot if you're weakened by infection or pain. Let me see. He hesitates, but the logic is sound. Slowly, he pulls back his sleeve. The burn is sealed but still raw. She examines it, gingerly touching the edges of the wound. He flinches. Her skin is oddly warm, and that subtle hum or tingle washes over him like static electricity. She meets his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then, placing a hand lightly above the injury, she closes her eyes. A faint glow radiates from her palm, so slight he might be imagining it. His body tingles, a mild warmth spreading through the damaged tissue. Then it fades. She lowers her hand, stepping back. I can accelerate healing a little. Don't count on me to fix everything. He checks the wound, finding it less tender. He can't hide his surprise. You have healing abilities? She shakes her head. Not exactly. Something akin to bioenergetic manipulation. Only partial. Don't get used to it. His throat tightens with conflicting emotions. He thanks her, almost, but the word snags in his mouth. Instead, he nods curtly, turning away to face the viewport. We'll set down on that planetoid, he says, pointing to a swirling mass of gas and debris on the edge of the star map. Should be stable enough to land near its rings, while outside standard patrol routes. She steps beside him, peering at the display. Agreed. Let's move. The sooner we land, the sooner we can figure out how to end this war. He glances at her, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Why do you care about ending it? Your people declared it. She hesitates. We declared it because we saw no other path. But there are those among us who question the necessity. She exhales, the faint shimmer in her skin dimming. I have duties, Mercer. And I can't fulfill them if I'm at the mercy of your war machine. He grinds his teeth. Fine. But if this is a trap. It's not. She slides into the co-pilot's seat, preparing for descent. We have more to lose if we turn on each other now. He doesn't reply, but the thought lingers. They power down some non-essential systems to avoid detection, gliding toward the swirling planetoid. A pale ring arcs around it, chunks of ice and rock drifting in a glittering belt. Dax maneuvers through the debris carefully. Zyra provides sensor updates, scanning for any hidden threats. The synergy is unsettling. They work together seamlessly, as if they've done it before. Soon, they find a stable orbit near a large chunk of ice, using its mass as partial cover. Dax sets the shuttle down on a ridge, the landing gear squeaking as it touches solid ground. Gravity is low, but a faint atmosphere allows them to step outside with minimal gear. The plan is to keep the shuttle running in low-power mode, masked from external scans. He shoulders a blaster rifle from the storage locker, while Zyra picks up a slender blade she's somehow stashed away. He eyes her warily. She shrugs. Just in case. They exit the shuttle, stepping onto the planetoid's rocky surface. An eerie twilight cloaks the horizon, cast by the faint glow of the ring's ice fragments reflecting distant starlight. The air tastes metallic, but it's breathable. A howling wind sweeps dust across the uneven ground. Zyra's hair, shimmering with subtle luminescence, flicks around her shoulders. She stands tall, scanning the horizon with a regal, predatory air. She gestures to a small outcropping of rock, half buried in the dust. If we set up a vantage point there, we can watch for approaching ships. He nods, following her. Each step is a reminder of the low gravity. His boots kick up dust that lingers in the air. They climb to a small plateau overlooking the shuttle. He sets the rifle down, scanning with binoculars. Nothing on the horizon but swirling dust and ice shards in the sky. We'll be safe here for a while, he says quietly. We can talk about next steps. She sits on a flat stone, crossing her legs. Her posture is confident, unconcerned. And what do you propose? He lowers the binoculars, turning to face her. Her luminous skin patterns dance with the faint cosmic glow. Despite himself, he finds the sight unsettlingly beautiful, a constant reminder that she isn't human. He looks away, focusing on the swirling sky. We gather intel, piece together what you know, what I know. If it's enough, we find a way to force both sides to the negotiating table. She exhales. Easier said than done. My people believe negotiation is weakness. Yours do too, if we're honest. He grimaces. Then we'll make them see reason. She gives him a long look, as if studying the lines of his face. There's something about you, Mercer. You fight with a fervor that borders on desperation. I wonder if you're truly doing this for your people, or if you're driven by your own personal vendetta. He scowls, not wanting to delve into that. You killed my squad. She nods slowly. That would be motive enough. A fragile silence settles. She stands, taking a few steps closer, her eyes gliding over him. You're still wounded by it, more than physically. He clenches his fists. Don't psychoanalyze me. Her gaze flickers. I'm not. I'm just acknowledging the truth. War leaves scars that never fully heal. He forces a scoff. Spare me the pity. I'm sure you have blood on your hands too. She hesitates, something like regret crossing her features, but she quickly masks it. We're all killers in this conflict. There's no innocence left. Another gust of wind sweeps the ridge, carrying ice crystals that sparkle like shards of glass. They swirl around them, catching in Zyra's hair. Dax steps back, bracing against the wind, but she remains unmoved, her posture regal. The awkward standoff is palpable, each grappling with the tension that runs deeper than mere hatred. Finally, she breaks the silence, voice taut. We need each other, at least for now. He nods, swallowing down a retort. Then let's keep watch. We can't afford to be caught off guard. Night on this planetoid is hard to define, but eventually, they settle into a low bunker routine within the shuttle, rotating watch. Hours stretch into a day, maybe more. They speak in short bursts, mostly about war tactics or scanning for threats. But the forced proximity grates on them. He can't ignore the way his pulse quickens when she brushes past him in the cramped quarters, or how she occasionally stands too close, her alien warmth radiating into him. They sleep in shifts, each claiming a corner of the shuttle to avoid contact. The days bleed together in uneasy tension. Any attempt to delve deeper into each other's motives ends in an argument. She challenges him with every remark. He fires back with equal force. Their words crackle like sparks in a tinderbox. Yet behind that, something else simmers. They decide they can't linger forever. The planetoid is remote, but eventually, patrols or pirates might stumble across them. They revisit the star chart data, trying to find a corridor that leads to a strategic vantage point, a place where they might intercept communications or gather the intel needed to force negotiations. Both of them approach the task with single-minded determination. The friction is undeniable, yet it fuels them. At one point, while analyzing the map on the shuttle's console, Zyra stands behind Dax, her breath hot against his neck. He tenses, trying not to notice how his skin prickles at her proximity. She points to a sector near an unstable nebula. There. If we set up a listening post, we could intercept transmissions from both militaries. Evidence of the conflict's cost might push for a truce. He nods, ignoring the jolt that her closeness gives him. We'd still have to broadcast it widely enough to pressure the leaders. And that means exposing our location. She steps back a fraction, the tension thick. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. He exhales, rotating in the pilot's seat to face her. Her luminous eyes glimmer in the soft cockpit light. She's so alien, yet undeniably compelling, like a puzzle he can't stop trying to solve. He searches her face, uncertain why. She raises a brow. What? He turns back to the controls. Nothing. He inputs the coordinates. Let's prepare to jump. They go through the routine of powering up the engines, checking the stealth systems. She straps in, still free of restraints. That trust is precarious, but they maintain it by necessity. The moment he initiates the jump, the swirling cosmos envelop them. Space contorts, a kaleidoscope of stars spinning past the viewport. His heart pounds half from the jump, half from the silent awareness of her presence. She declared war on his kind, yet here they are, forging a fragile bond built on survival. They emerge near the nebula, a roiling cloud of cosmic dust and charged plasma. Beautiful yet lethal storms flicker within. Dax maneuvers into a stable orbit around a small planetoid that drifts in the nebula's outskirts. The swirling haze partially masks their sensor signature. They can linger here, scanning subspace channels, hoping to catch the transmissions they need. In the subdued glow of the nebula's light, they share the cockpit. She points out frequencies used by her species, layering them over the human channels he's familiar with. It's a strange, intimate collaboration, their arms brushing as they lean over the same console. Each time they touch, a spark of tension leaps, intensifying the coil of attraction they refuse to acknowledge out loud. He sets an automated sweep, the console whirring softly. "We'll let it record everything. If there's anything that can force a negotiation, we'll find it." She nods, stepping aside, arms crossed. "And then what? We broadcast it. We become targets of both sides?" He shakes his head. "Maybe we leak it anonymously. If the truth is damning enough, we can stay hidden." Her lips twist in a cynical smile. "You think either side will let such information go unchallenged?" He grimaces. "No. But it's a start." She lowers her gaze, luminous markings flickering. "This war might not end because of a few transmissions." He rakes a hand through his hair, frustration seeping into his voice. "You have a better idea?" A long pause. Then she lifts her head, eyes lingering on him. "There might be a direct route to push for an armistice. A council of sorts. Elder statesmen from my species who don't agree with the war. They keep their identities hidden. If we could reach them, present them with undeniable proof that continuing this conflict dooms both sides, they might exert enough political pressure to at least halt major offensives." He arches a brow. "And how do we find them?" She exhales. "They contact me sometimes, in coded messages. I could try reaching out, but it's risky. They might have gone underground entirely. Also, they might kill you on sight if you're with me." He gives a humorless laugh. "Figures." They stand in silence, neither entirely convinced of the path forward. Outside, the nebula glows, cosmic storms illuminating the cockpit in pulses of blue and green. The soft, flickering light plays across her features, emphasizing her beauty. It's a harsh reminder that even in war, she can stun him. He forces his thoughts away from that path. The tension builds day by day. They eat in shifts, rarely speaking unless it's to coordinate. Each time they pass in the narrow corridor of the shuttle, their bodies brush, igniting a flicker of awareness they both try to ignore. She'll test him with a lingering look. He'll fight the urge to react. Sleep is fragmented for both of them. And in the quiet darkness, their minds wander. After a week of scanning, a breakthrough, they intercept a coded broadcast from Zyra's species. It references a location where critical negotiations or strategic planning is underway. She deciphers some of it, enough to suspect it might be the meeting of the elders she mentioned. Dax stares at the data, dread and hope warring in his chest. "This could be it," he says hoarsely. She nods, eyes alight with possibility. "If I can reach them, we might broker a ceasefire." He exhales. "Or they'll capture us both. You for associating with a human, me for being human." She doesn't deny it. "The risk is high. But we're out of time. The transmissions say the war is escalating on multiple fronts, with catastrophic losses. Soon, there may be nothing left to save." A grim resolve settles over him. "Fine. We'll try." He swallows, meeting her gaze. "Then we end this war." She nods, a flicker of relief crossing her features. For a moment, they share a raw, unspoken understanding, they're crossing a line from which there may be no return. He toggles the console, tracing the source of the signal. It's in the heart of contested territory, near a devastated colony world. Zyra bites her lip, luminous patterns flaring with tension. "We'll have to fly right into the lion's den." He starts the engines, steeling himself. "Let's go." They slip through the nebula, quiet and cautious. Every sensor is on minimal power to avoid detection. Once they're clear, they make a jump to the coordinates. The swirling cosmos envelop them again. In the tight cockpit, her presence is suffocating in its intensity. He tries not to think about how her voice resonates in his chest when she speaks, how her proximity ignites a slow burn in his stomach. They re-emerge near a battered planet, its surface scorched from countless battles. Large swathes of land lie blackened, cities reduced to rubble. The atmosphere is thick with ash. Orbiting the planet, a small alien station gleams, half hidden behind a debris field of destroyed ships. Zyra points at it. That must be the meeting place. Dax clenches his jaw. No visible guard ships. Could be a trap. She checks the sensor readouts. It's shielded. A small docking bay in the station's belly. We approach with stealth, see if they respond to my identification codes. He nods, swallowing. If they start firing, we jump out. She breathes deeply, then inputs an encrypted code into the shuttle's transmitter. They approach slowly, slip into the docking bay. There's no gunfire, no alarms. The station's interior is dimly lit, a hush over the calm. She stands, checking her gear. Let me go first. He shakes his head. I'm coming with you. She stares at him. They may see that as a threat. He squares his shoulders. We do this together, or not at all. A faint spark in her eyes. All right. They exit the shuttle into a deserted hangar, footsteps echoing. The structure is alien in design, curving arches and glowing glyphs. Doors line the walls, no visible guards. Zyra steps forward. Elders, she calls in her language, voice echoing. Dax's hand hovers near his sidearm. Silence answers. Then a panel slides open on the far wall. Figures emerge, tall and cloaked. Their features are obscured, but the shimmer of their skin patterns identifies them as her species. They approach, each step whisper quiet. Zyra stands her ground, but Dax senses her tension. One elder steps forward, pulling back a hood to reveal a lined, regal face, luminous markings faint with age. Zyra Voss, the elder says, voice deep and resonant. You've returned. Zyra inclines her head in a gesture of respect. I come seeking an end to this war. The elder's eyes flick to Dax. You stand with a human soldier. Zyra's chin lifts. Yes. Because we have a common goal. A ripple passes through the cloaked figures. The elder regards Dax with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Your presence is an affront. Our people have lost countless warriors to your kind. Dax stiffens, wanting to retort, but Zyra speaks first. We've all lost too much. The war escalates daily. More worlds burn. There's no victory in this. Only extinction. Your hidden faction, the ones who see reason, you must rise now. The elder's luminous eyes flare. You speak as though you're free to command us. I'm not commanding, Zyra says. I'm imploring. She gestures to Dax. He's gathered intelligence from his side. We know their defenses, their weaknesses, and we know they will fight to the last man. There will be no surrender unless we force negotiations. Another elder steps forward. And what guarantee do we have that the humans won't strike us down the moment we lower our weapons? Dax exhales, stepping in. Because they won't have a chance if we show them the full cost of continuing. We have evidence, transmissions that show the scale of destruction, not just on my side, but on yours too. A murmur ripples through the group. The first elder turns back to Zyra. You were once among our highest ranks, loyal to the cause. How did you come to stand beside a human? She hesitates, exchanging a glance with Dax. There's no easy explanation. I saw no other path. We declared war because we feared annihilation, but this path leads to mutual doom. The elder seems unconvinced. And you, human? What do you truly want? He meets the elder's gaze, keeping his voice steady. Peace, even if I have to bleed for it. Enough people have died. Silence. Then the elder raises a hand, and the cloaked group parts, revealing a central console. Show us your evidence. They move to the console, Zyra and Dax uploading data they've gathered, the transmissions, the casualty reports. The elders watch in grim silence, lines furrowing their brows at the staggering numbers. Finally, one of them speaks, voice trembling with emotion. Our people, so many lost. This is the future if we continue, Zyra says quietly. Our species may be strong, but we are not infinite. The first elder draws in a measured breath. We will convene, but we cannot promise immediate compliance. There are factions within our leadership who profit from war. Dax exchanges a look with Zyra. Then we'll expose their lies, their hidden agendas. We'll force them into a truce. The elder's gaze sweeps over them both. You risked everything. If you fail, you'll be executed. Possibly by your own leaders. Are you prepared for that? Zyra's eyes flicker. Yes. Dax just nods, the memory of his fallen squad fueling his resolve. Yes. A quiet hush follows. The elder extends a slender hand. Zyra clasps it, a silent vow passing between them. The group beckons them deeper into the station for a private council. The corridors twist, illuminated by faint glyphs. Dax remains alert, but the elders show no aggression beyond their wariness of him. Eventually, they reach a small chamber filled with a swirling pool of luminous liquid. The elders stand around it, chanting softly in a language unknown to him. Zyra explains in a hushed tone. It's a communal memory pool. They can see shared knowledge, witness your truths. He nods, stepping forward. Show them. She guides him, pressing his hand to the pool's surface. The liquid ripples, glowing fiercely. He feels a strange tug in his mind, images flickering across the surface, his memories of the outpost, the bodies, the rage. It's invasive, yet he doesn't resist. The elders watch, their expressions darkening. Then they see flashes of Zyra's involvement, her guilt, her defiance. As the memories play out, tension thickens. Finally, the pool stills. The elders exhale in unison, heads bowed. The first elder speaks. Your pain is real, human. Your dedication is remarkable, Zyra Voss. We will rally those who wish for peace. But you must help us strike at the warmongers in our ranks. She frowns. How? Expose them publicly. Reveal their atrocities, their manipulations. Bring them down from within. Then we can stand as a unified voice, demanding negotiation with the humans. Dax's fists clench. And my people? They won't just lay down arms. The elder's gaze turns to him. We will supply you with proof of their war crimes as well. Leverage it against your leaders. Show them the futility. A tall order, but perhaps their only hope. Zyra nods, stepping back from the pool. We'll do it. She glances at Dax, a silent question in her eyes. He gives a curt nod, swallowing the knot of anxiety forming in his throat. The elders instruct them to wait, while they gather the necessary data. Hours pass in the station's dim halls, tension hanging like a pall. Zyra and Dax find a quiet corner, leaning against a curved wall. Exhaustion weighs on them. They slide down, sitting side by side. For the first time, the hush between them feels less combative. Their shoulders almost brush. Eventually, she breaks the silence. Thank you, she says softly. He turns his head, surprised. For what? For letting me take this chance. You could have stuck to your revenge. He exhales, rubbing the back of his neck. Doesn't feel like I'm doing you a favor. We're both risking our lives. She offers a faint smile. Still. A subtle shift. Their eyes meet. Tension flickers like an ember. He can see the reflection of the station lights dancing in her irises, the gentle glow on her cheeks. Something in him stirs, a swirl of conflicting desire and guilt. She killed his squad, or at least was part of that slaughter. Yet she's also the only being in this war who truly understands what he's lost, because she's lost too, in her own way. Her voice is barely above a whisper. I sense your fear. Not of me, but of what you're becoming. He stiffens, not sure how to respond. Instead of speaking, he looks away. But she leans closer, her warmth suffusing his senses. We have to survive first, he mutters. Then sort out whatever's left of our souls. She inches closer, eyes half-lidded. Perhaps. Her breath grazes his ear, igniting a spike of awareness in his core. He wants to push her away, to remind himself she's the enemy. But war draws strange alliances, forging an intimacy from shared terror and purpose. His chest tightens. Before either can act, a soft chime echoes down the corridor. One of the elders appears, beckoning them to follow. The moment snaps. Dax stands quickly, clearing his throat. She rises too, smoothing her hair, luminous patterns shifting in agitation. They walk after the elder into a chamber lined with tall spires that hum with energy. The elders present them with a data crystal. Inside is evidence of our own leadership's crimes. Corruption, forced conscription, slaughter of dissenters. You can use it to weaken their cause. Zyra's expression hardens. They've hidden so much from our people. The elder nods sadly. Yes. And as for the humans, we have partial intel about infiltration, sabotage, and plans to escalate the conflict to biological warfare. Enough to blackmail them into negotiations, if used carefully. Dax's stomach churns at the mention of biological warfare. We can't let that happen. Then you know what to do, the elder says. Go quickly. If you are discovered here, it will jeopardize our efforts. We will do what we can from within, but we place our trust in you both. Zyra inclines her head. Dax murmurs his thanks, clasping the crystal. With that, they're ushered out. The station hums with renewed tension, as if aware of the precarious alliance forming. Dax and Zyra board their shuttle, engines flaring as they depart. This time, she sits in the co-pilot's seat, gaze distant. He glances at her. Where to now? She thinks for a moment. Somewhere we can safely broadcast this and ensure it reaches those in power. It has to be big, public, unstoppable. He exhales, scanning star charts. There's a communications hub near the border, heavily fortified. If we break in, we can piggyback the data across every major news channel in the sector. Both sides watch that feed. Her eyes narrow. They'll have defenses, maybe even capital ships. He nods grimly. We'll have to be clever. Or suicidal. She smirks. We've come this far. Together, they plot a course, each step heavy with the knowledge that they're heading into the final stage of this insane plan. If they succeed, the war could end, or at least be suspended. If they fail, they'll likely be executed by whichever side catches them first. Oddly, the prospect only intensifies the tension between them. A shared sense of imminent danger draws them closer, no matter how they fight it. They jump to the border region, a contested zone patrolled by both human and alien fleets. The communications hub is a massive orbital platform guarded by advanced turrets and multiple frigates. They watch from a distance, scanning patterns, looking for an opening. Eventually, they find a small maintenance window, a scheduled shift change that leaves the docking bay lightly staffed. Dax sets the shuttle on a stealth approach. Zyra readies her gear, collecting weapons and the data crystal. We go in, patch the data into the main feed, and hold off any security until the broadcast is complete. He suits up, checking the charge in his rifle. We'll probably have to fight our way back out. She nods, luminous patterns flickering with anticipation. I wouldn't expect anything less. They dock, slipping past the initial scans with forged credentials. The corridor they step into is eerily quiet, overshadowed by the hum of machinery. Their plan is to reach the central control station near the core. They move quickly, exchanging only necessary words. The tension is a high-wire act. They can't afford to be discovered too soon. However, as they progress, an alarm blares. Red lights flash, and a mechanical voice announces an intruder alert. Dax curses under his breath. They found us. Zyra growls, brandishing her blade. So much for stealth. Let's move. Armed guards flood the corridor, some human, some from her species. The war's front lines are blurred here, with various factions controlling different levels of the station. Dax opens fire, covering Zyra as she darts forward, her blades slashing with lethal precision. Sparks fly, blood spills. The conflict is brutal and swift. They push deeper, forcing their way through wave after wave of defenders. She takes a plasma burn to her shoulder at one point, crying out in pain, but she keeps fighting. Dax wrestles with a particularly large alien soldier, smashing him against the control panel until he collapses. The station quakes from internal blasts. They leave a trail of chaos behind them. Eventually, they burst into the central control chamber, a cavernous room filled with blinking consoles and holodisplays. Zyra darts to the main console, shoving aside the terrified technicians. Dax slaps charges on the entry door, sealing it behind them to buy time. He stands guard, panting, rifle aimed at the shattered door. Over his shoulder, he yells, "Hurry!" She's sweating, luminous skin flaring erratically. "I'm in." Overriding the encryption. She fumbles with the data crystal, inserting it into a slot. "It's uploading. 30 seconds to full broadcast." 30 seconds is a long time, he grits out. The door behind him shudders under repeated blasts from guards trying to break in. Sweat beads on his forehead. Zyra types furiously, her fingers dancing over alien glyphs. A progress bar creeps across the holodisplay. 20 seconds. The door starts to buckle. Dax fires through a crack, hearing shouts of pain. 15 seconds. A small explosion from the corridor outside. 10 seconds. The door is nearly torn off its hinges. He glances back at Zyra, who is grimacing, forcing the console to accept the data. Alarms scream, the station's automated defense systems trying to shut them out. 5 seconds. 4. 3. 2. Done! She shouts, slamming a final command. An ominous hum resonates through the station. Across every display, text and images from the data crystal flood. The war crimes, the casualty lists, the hidden agendas. Both species' atrocities, laid bare in real time. Dax can almost feel the shock radiating through the entire sector as transmissions beam out to every major channel. Then the door explodes inward, and a squad of heavily armed guards storms in. Dax and Zyra dive for cover, exchanging furious gunfire. It's a desperate last stand. One of the guards lobs a grenade. Dax hurls himself over a console to avoid the blast, ears ringing. Zyra presses against the console's side, gasping as her wounded shoulder bleeds. He crawls to her, heart pounding. "We've got to get out of here!" She nods, eyes shining with pain and determination. "The broadcast is out. We did it." They crawl to a side hatch. Dax yanks it open. A narrow maintenance shaft leads downward. Shots ricochet above them, showering them with sparks. Zyra drops into the shaft first, wincing at the jolt to her injured shoulder. Dax follows, sealing the hatch behind them. They tumble down a ladder, boots clanging. At the bottom, they find themselves in a dim corridor near an escape pod bay. Outside, the station reverberates with chaos. The war's darkest secrets are on full display. Eventually, reinforcements from both species will arrive, each uncertain whether to fight or talk, now that everything is exposed. Dax and Zyra limp toward the escape pods, adrenaline fueling their battered bodies. They find a single functional pod, climbing inside. Dax smashes the launch button. The pod ejects, speeding away from the station. Through the viewport, they see bursts of gunfire and distant ship movements. The sector is in uproar. Yet the broadcast continues to loop, unstoppable. In days, maybe hours, the political landscape will shift, leaders forced to address what's been revealed. The war, if not ended, will at least grind to a halt for negotiations. Dax and Zyra sit in the cramped pod, breathing hard. Blood mats her hair, sweat streaks his face. They're both exhausted, beaten down by the ordeal. But beneath it all, a current of triumph and relief pulses. He looks at her. "We did it." She gives a shaky nod, luminous markings flickering weakly. "Yes." They drift in tense silence for a moment, hearts pounding. Then that silent awareness blooms between them, no longer enemies, but not exactly allies in a conventional sense. Something deeper than a battlefield truce. The air is thick with unspoken words. Her eyes flutter closed, and she sags against the pod's wall. He lifts a hand, gently brushing the hair from her face. She doesn't stop him. His hand stills on her cheek, feeling the faint warmth of her alien skin. Her eyes open, meeting his. The overhead lights flicker, highlighting the raw vulnerability in that moment. She declared war on his people, yet here they are, fleeing together, battered and united by their choice to break the cycle of violence. The fury that once fueled him has shifted into a fierce protectiveness, a need to hold on to this fragile alliance. Maybe it's more than that. He can feel the fast thud of his own heartbeat echo in his ears. She leans forward, lips parted, breath ghosting over his jaw. He sucks in air, half lost in the swirling confusion of desire and caution. Then, with a sudden burst of shared recklessness, they crash together in a bruising kiss, raw and unyielding. It's not soft. It's a struggle for control, a release of pent-up fury and longing. She bites his lip, and he grips her shoulders, mindful of her wound. The taste of copper floods his mouth. This is what they are, two warring souls finding a single point of contact in the midst of chaos. They break apart, panting. Her eyes glow, luminous patterns flaring with intensity. "You're bleeding," she murmurs, wiping her thumb across a cut on his lower lip. He exhales shakily. "So are you." She smirks, ignoring the trickle of blood down her arm. "Guess we're both a mess." He cups her cheek, searching her gaze. "No going back from this." Her voice wavers soft. "We crossed that line long ago." They sink into another desperate kiss, though gentler this time, fueled by relief and something akin to hope. In this cramped pod, they'd found a fleeting sanctuary, a moment of respite from the war they unleashed. The swirling starfield outside drifts past, the station receding behind them. When they finally pull away, they share a long look, a silent acknowledgement that everything has changed. The tension that once threatened to destroy them now binds them together, forging a bond as fierce as any vow. She rests her forehead against his, eyes half closed. "What happens now?" He wraps an arm around her, feeling the tremors in her body. "Now we see if the broadcast forces both sides to the table. If it does, maybe this nightmare ends." She snorts, a weary sound. "Or it could spark another wave of violence." He holds her closer. "Then we'll face it. Together." A fragile peace settles over them. Days later, their pod is picked up by a neutral rescue craft, manned by those who received the broadcast and want to avoid further bloodshed. There are no shackles, no cell. Instead, they're treated for their wounds, hailed, begrudgingly, by some as catalysts for a possible armistice. In the days that follow, tension ripples through the galaxy as the revelations from the broadcast take root. Leaders on both sides are forced to stand down, at least temporarily, as the public outcry grows. Dax and Zyra stay close, uncertain of their status. To some, they're traitors, to others, they're heroes. Rumors swirl of official negotiations. A shaky ceasefire takes hold. Skirmishes die down. They find themselves in the corridor of a neutral starship, gazing out at a window that frames a battered planet below. No words pass between them, but the shift in the air is unmistakable. Something decisive has ended. War, maybe? Or at least the endless cycle of hatred. He turns to her, heart heavy with the memories of all they've lost. She meets his gaze, luminous eyes steady. Slowly, he slides a hand around her waist, drawing her in. She presses a hand to his chest, resting her head against him. Outside, a damaged fleet withdraws, the first sign of a promised negotiation. The final clamor of war recedes, replaced by an unsteady peace. And in that moment, they share a quiet intimacy, forging a future that feels earned and undeniable. The conflict that brought them together may never vanish completely, but they've carved out something stronger, a bond that defies species and grudges. As they watch the last ships disappear into jump space, they hold each other, aware that the galaxy has changed. When they finally turn from the window, they do so hand in hand, stepping forward into whatever lies ahead. No cliffhangers remain, no illusions that life will be simple. But the war they once waged on each other has ended in this small corner of the cosmos, replaced by a rare hope. The finality settles in, they've made their choice, and no one can take it from them. And so they leave, side by side, ready to face whatever new challenges this uncertain peace brings, together.